So because I didn't have like a fully developed brain yet, I didn't think long term at all.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Nick Davenport, aka Mr. Mental Muscle, back on the Mental Breakdown channel. Now, have you ever made a bad decision? You probably have. And more than likely, if you made this bad decision, it was probably when you were younger, probably under 20, 21, maybe even a teenager. Now, we make mistakes. They say with age comes wisdom, right? And wisdom can be debated. It's a philosophical thought of how we age and get more information so we learn better from our mistakes. But sometimes this doesn't always happen. Some people are 50, 60 years old, don't have a thought in their mind. And some people are 21 and they know some things. But the point of saying this is a lot of times we try to excuse our behaviors because we're young and dumb. Now, today's clip comes from a podcast called Soothing Semantics. And it's interesting because I actually was on this podcast about 2 years ago talking about my career in the mental performance and mental health fields. And his host, Rafi Pinsky, is a pretty cool guy. And he had some interesting panelists because he had two that are very notable YouTubers, Just Pearly Things and Mediocre Tutorials and Reviews, and two people I've covered on this channel numerous times. And I also had an OnlyFans model as well as an entrepreneur. So it was a good conversation. It went back and forth on several hot topics. And what I noticed, one clip, it talked about the frontal lobe.
I got started in when I was super young, not on OnlyFans, like before OnlyFans started. So because I didn't have like a fully developed brain yet, I didn't think long term at all.
How old were you?
I was 19.
Okay, 19.
Yeah. But now I'm almost 27, so I can think about these more long term. And especially with like the family aspect and relationships, it is something to consider. But at the end of the day, I think it's a bit dehumanizing to think that there's no other substance to girls who do only so that they can't be a mom. Because a lot of us are nurturing and want to have children ourselves. So we do bring other things to the table rather than just being like a fun little one night stand type vibe.
Now, if you don't know what the frontal lobe is, this is the part of the brain that's the most recently developed in our evolution. If you go from the back, the hindbrain forward, they call it the hindbrain, the reptilian brain. This is things like the amygdala, which is our emotional instinctual center, which makes us go into that fight or flight mode when we have to make quick decisions. And sometimes they're always the best. But the closer you get to the frontal lobe, this is the newer area. This is where we make decisions, we rationalize something called executive functions. Now, compared to every other animal species, pound for pound, we have the largest frontal lobe. And like I said, that's relevant to body size. Obviously, a bigger animal, bigger head has a bigger frontal lobe, but in relevance to the body size, we have the largest. The next animal is 4 times smaller, and that's the bonobo. It's a type of chimpanzee, which they link to humans as well, another primate. But basically, we have the largest pound for pound. So guess what? This means better cognition. That's why we have survived so long. Most animals survive off of instincts, power, and a hierarchy, being an apex predator or just surviving due to camouflage or other means. Us, on the other hand, we don't have really any of those. We're not that strong, we're not that fast, but we have cognitions. Not to say we're smarter or dumber, but we're able to make sense of things. If we see something out of place, we can rationalize and say, hey, that's not right, and make an informed decision to not do it. Or we might still do it and be impulsive, and it might harm us or even worse. Now, this is where it comes back into my point from this clip. She said she got into OnlyFans or work like that because she was young and her frontal lobe wasn't fully formed. And this myth gets thrown out a lot. Now, you see it a lot in court cases, usually it's like school shootings, and they'll say things like debate whether their brain is in the right mindset. And I don't like this for 2 reasons. One, it's a myth that gets perpetuated and it's not really substantial in the actual neuroscience field. And a lot of neuroscientists who study the brain won't back this up because they talk about at age 25, the brain isn't fully formed yet until then. Now, the problem with this is that's just an arbitrary number. There's no actual science that says 25 is where your brain just clicks. It doesn't work like that. Now, does it affect your processing? Sure. But you can't dictate how someone behaves simply on neuroanatomy because yes, there is a physiological aspect where the brain doesn't fire as efficiently, but it doesn't mean they can't still make good choices. That's basically giving someone a get out of jail free card from any bad choice they make in life, whether it be something petty or even criminal. And we can't do this because while someone may not have the full capacity, it doesn't mean they don't know better because knowledge has different relevancies. Like you could have crystallized knowledge when understanding an actual concept of, okay, 1 + 1 is 2, or the capital of Spain is Madrid, right? But you also have things that require working memory, which is housed in the frontal lobe, which is making real-time information, taking into consideration, using your long-term storage, bringing that back and saying, what do I do here? Problem solving, decision making. These are actual steps, and this can be learned and improved, but all because you're younger doesn't mean you don't understand. there's kids who are 7, 8 years old who understand right and wrong and wouldn't do certain things. So you could say, well, because they're 8 years old, they shouldn't be able to know this, but that's not true. And just like someone who's 29, 30, 40 even, they might do the same things. So chalking up all to brain science and neuroanatomy is a cop-out, mostly I think because people don't understand it. It's another myth. 25, it doesn't really show that this is the number that means anything. Brain development can go into early adulthood, but I think they use the 25 number because it just sounded good. It's a quarter of a century. It's a clean-cut number, 25, 50, 100. So it can be divided into that versus saying it's like 23 or not 19. Some people even say 24. But what truly is it? So most people don't understand that. It's kind of like we only use 10% of our brain myth. That's not true either. We use all of our brain. It just trades off in different compartments because each region has a different function. So put that to bed. I think she was just trying to excuse her behavior, maybe not intentionally, but I hear that way too much.
I think it's so interesting about content nowadays is that like we've gone through so many decades of a certain type of narrative from like female dominated, whether it be talk shows or this and that. Right. So it's like these echo chambers that have been created, which goes into women's empowerment while also kind of like a subtle diss and shot at men, like men is trash type shit. Yeah. But see, the difference today is that now people are incentivized to be truthful. So I think now that we have TikTok and IG Reels and all of these things, and you have these people just on screen just saying whatever it is that they want to say. So now we get more of an insight into actual human behavior versus the construction of media over the past several decades. So that's why so many people are looking at the content like, what? And you get so many dudes that are just like, oh, women are not all sugar, spice, and everything nice. They can be just as violent as me. Well, not just as violent, but.
Now, in this other clip, MTR got into a point about how social media, TikTok, Instagram has facilitated people able to be more open and honest about their actual intentions and behaviors. And it kind of shed a light on some people may not have the best interest for the world. Now, this is not a man thing, a woman thing. This is a human thing. We all have different strategies on how we get things in life. And when it comes back to mating, going back to the previous clip, how the OnlyFans model talked about her bad decisions and how she got into OnlyFans, but people should look at them as just the recreational use only woman. Now, I understand that you might be a great person, but we work in schemas. Our brain likes to connect the dots. So if a man sees that a woman is doing sex work, he might automatically assume that it may not take much to get her. And even if it does take money or dating or courting, that's all he's going to want to do. He's not going to want to take you seriously because of that reason. So going back to what MTR said on top of what she said, we can get into something like long-term and short-term mating strategies. In evolutionary psychology, you talk about how do we come to mate with one another. Now, in ancient times, like I always say, now there's no more saber-toothed tigers. We can kind of get away from this. But in ancient times, you had to use this kind of logic to say, hey, if I'm going to mate with this individual, what is my strategy? What I'm going to get out of it? So a long-term strategy is obviously trying to make a family, a nuclear bond, so you can have children and have resources for the children. Now, short-term, it can still be for children, but the main idea is just to have fun, do what you need to do. Now, in ancient times, someone have a short-term strategy and they'll just spread their seed, but they're not going to provide for that family unit and they're going to go about their day. Now, in those times, that was very bad because if you don't have the resources, you probably wouldn't survive. It's hard enough to survive with one mouth, but adding one or two more mouths is not going to help. Now, with long-term mating strategy, we're looking at it like, okay, this is the man I want, so I'm going to do the things required to show them that I'm a suitable mate that will give him children, and he's going to know these are my children. This is how we evolve. Now, jumping back to the OnlyFans thing, a man seeing that is not really going to think that's a long-term strategy because he's thinking, wait, they're going to sexualize themselves to everyone? That's not something I want because it can ensure that my seed will be my seed. Now, granted, we have paternity tests now, but this is not how we're wired. Our evolutionary biology and psychology is still in a certain place while socialization, society as a whole, is way ahead of it. I always say it's like a foot race for the brain, the body, and society. The brain and the body are kind of like right here with that foot race, but society's way out here. And we haven't really caught up yet. Yes, we have different standards, but those standards have only been around 50, 60 years. Abortion, birth control, these conveniences have only been in place so long, so we don't know what the long-term effects of that from a historical standpoint. We talk about tens of thousands of years of evolving how we made it and grew and procreated for this long time versus 60, 70 years max. It's not much we can go off of that. So the problem is we're seeing the societal setup. Most people think from this framework. So going back to the OnlyFans model, she thinks that it's okay because she knows she's probably not a bad person. And granted, she may not be, but it's not what's being seen. Our brain, like I said, works in schema. It likes to connect the dots. This means if it makes this one assumption, it's going to jump to the conclusion that makes the most sense, right? Usually the simplest solution is the one you should go with. So if I see someone on OnlyFans, it's a sex work type of job or a webcam or whatever it is, something in that industry, I'm going to assume you have no problem with your sexuality being shown, seen, or given away. Therefore, I wouldn't want to invest time, effort, resource, and then my actual biology, because it's all about sending the next set of genes on to the next generation. So this can go many different ways. And it's quite interesting how some people skew these different terms or these concepts. And they try to use science to justify it. That's why I like to break these things down on the channel. So let me know what you guys think about this. Once again, Sootings Semantics, go subscribe to his channel. It's a great podcast. Check out my episode. I'll put both links down below, as well as the link to the full episode of this with just pearly things and MTR. And let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, get your mind right.